Maya Chen was stirring soup in the kitchen when the doorbell rang at 9:47 p.m. on that terrible Tuesday night, and she knew instantly that something was wrong because her parents, David and Sarah, never had visitors this late, especially not police officers with grim faces who asked to come inside while removing their hats with slow, careful movements that made her stomach twist into knots. Her 15-year-old brother Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs in his pajamas, his dark hair messy from sleep, and Maya watched his face change from confusion to fear as the officers explained in gentle but firm voices that there had been an accident on Highway 15, that a drunk driver had run a red light, and that their parents would not be coming home ever again. The next few hours passed in a blur of tears and phone calls and neighbors arriving with casseroles that no one would eat. But Maya kept thinking about how her mother Sarah had kissed her forehead that morning and said, "Take care of your brother," today, as if she somehow knew it would be the last time she could say those words. The funeral 3 days later was held at St. Mary's Church, where Maya and Ethan sat in the front row wearing borrowed black clothes that didn't fit properly, surrounded by teachers and neighbors and family friends who all said the same things about how wonderful David and Sarah had been, how they were looking down from heaven, how everything would be okay, even though Maya knew nothing would ever be okay again. But the strangest moment came when the service ended and Maya was accepting hugs from people she barely knew, when a tall man in an expensive suit approached them with a woman who wore diamonds that caught the light from the church windows, and the man cleared his throat and said, "Maya, Ethan, I'm Robert Blackwell, and this is my wife, Patricia. We need to speak with you about your living arrangements," in a voice that was cold and businesslike, and completely wrong for a funeral. Maya felt Ethan's hand slip into hers as these strangers explained that they were listed as the children's legal guardians in important papers, that David and Sarah Chen had only been their adoptive parents, and that Maya and Ethan would be coming to live with the Blackwells immediately, because that's what the law required. Even though neither child had ever heard these names before, and David and Sarah had never once mentioned having backup plans or legal arrangements with anyone, Patricia Blackwell looked down at them with eyes like ice chips and said, "We'll give you 1 hour to pack your things, but don't bring too much because our house has rules, and we don't have room for clutter," while Robert checked his expensive watch and tapped his foot impatiently, as if attending the funeral of the only parents Maya and Ethan had ever known was an inconvenience that was keeping him from more important matters. The drive to the Blackwell mansion felt like traveling to another planet, with Maya clutching the small wooden box that held her mother's jewelry, and Ethan holding tight to the framed photo of all 4 of them at last Christmas, when they were still a complete family and had no idea that happiness could disappear so quickly and completely. The Blackwell house was huge and cold and filled with white furniture that looked like it had never been used by real people, and Patricia showed them 2 small rooms at the end of a long hallway, rooms that felt more like storage closets than bedrooms, with single beds and empty dressers and windows that looked out onto the brick wall of the garage instead of the garden view that Maya and Ethan had shared in their old home. That first night, as Maya lay in her narrow bed, listening to Ethan crying quietly through the thin wall between their rooms, she stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how their entire world had changed so completely in just 3 days, how they had gone from being beloved children in a warm home to unwanted burdens in a place where even breathing seemed to annoy their new guardians. And she whispered into the darkness, "Something doesn't feel right about this," Ethan knowing that her brother could hear her through the wall. Why didn't Mom and Dad ever mention these people? But there was no answer except the sound of Ethan's muffled sobs and the distant hum of the Blackwells' voices downstairs discussing their new responsibilities in tones that suggested Maya and Ethan were problems to be managed rather than children who needed love and comfort during the worst time of their young lives. And Maya fell asleep clutching the photo of her real family while wondering if she would ever feel safe and loved again, or if this cold, unwelcoming place would be her reality. Forever. The first morning at the Blackwell house started with Patricia's sharp voice cutting through Maya's dreams at exactly 6 a.m., demanding that she and Ethan come downstairs immediately for a discussion about house rules. And when they stumbled into the pristine kitchen, still wearing their pajamas, Robert was already there in his business suit, reading the newspaper and drinking coffee from a cup that probably costs more than their old family's weekly groceries. Patricia handed them each a typed list of expectations that included waking up at 6 every morning, doing chores before and after school, keeping their rooms spotless, never touching anything in the main part of the house, and staying in their wing of the mansion unless specifically called for. While Robert looked up from his paper long enough to add, "We're not running a charity here, children, and every dollar we spend on you comes out of our own pockets, so you'd better make yourselves useful." Maya read through the rules twice, her heart sinking as she realized they were being treated more like unwelcome servants than grieving children who had just lost their parents. But when Ethan whispered, "This isn't how families are supposed to work," Patricia's eyes flashed dangerously and she snapped, "We are not your family. We are your legal guardians, and there's a very big difference that you'd better learn quickly." The days that followed fell into a miserable routine where Maya would wake up early to do laundry and clean bathrooms before school, then rush to catch the bus, while Ethan took care of kitchen duties, and both of them would return home to find new chores waiting and Patricia complaining about the cost of their food, their school supplies, even the electricity they used by having lights on in their rooms. Maya started working part-time at Joe's coffee shop downtown after school, lying about her age to get the job, because she overheard Patricia telling Robert that they couldn't afford to keep buying the children clothes and school supplies, even though Maya had seen the size of their house and their expensive cars and knew they weren't struggling for money. At school, Maya and Ethan tried to act normal, but their teachers noticed they looked tired and thin, and when the guidance counselor Mrs. Rodriguez asked Maya how things were going at home, Maya wanted desperately to tell the truth but remembered Robert's warning that if they caused any trouble or complained to outsiders, they would be sent to foster care where things would be much worse. One evening in late October, when Maya was helping Ethan with his math homework in his small room, they heard Patricia and Robert arguing downstairs about money, and Patricia's voice carried clearly through the heating vents as she said, "I never agreed to this long-term arrangement. Robert, these kids are costing us a fortune, and I'm tired of having them around. They're disrupting our entire lifestyle." Robert's response was too quiet to hear, but Patricia's next words made both children freeze with terror. "Well, then we need to figure out a way to get rid of them, legally, because I'm not spending the next 3 years supporting someone else's children when Maya turns 18 and can take care of herself and her brother." That weekend, while Robert was playing golf and Patricia was at her book club, Maya decided to search for any information about their past, and she started going through the storage boxes that Robert had dumped in their rooms with their few belongings from the Chen house, looking for anything that might explain why their loving parents had never mentioned the Blackwells, or why these strangers had legal authority over their lives. Most of the boxes contained normal things like photo albums and Ethan's old-school projects and their mother's recipe cards. But at the bottom of the last box, wedged between 2 books, Maya found a sealed envelope that made her hands tremble with excitement and fear. The envelope was cream-colored and expressive-looking, with "For Maya and Ethan to be opened on Maya's 18th birthday," written in elegant handwriting across the front, and below that was a signature that read James Morrison, attorney at law, along with a phone number and address that Maya had never seen before. She called Ethan into her room and showed him the envelope, and they both stared at it as if it might explode, because neither of them had ever heard of James Morrison, and they couldn't understand why some lawyer would leave them a letter to open on Maya's birthday when she still had 6 months to go until she turned 18. They decided to hide the envelope under Maya's mattress and not tell the Blackwells about it. sensing instinctively that this mysterious letter might be important, and that Robert and Patricia couldn't be trusted with information about their past or their future. That night at dinner, Patricia looked at them with barely concealed hatred and said, "I hope you two are enjoying your comfortable life here, because it's not going to last forever." And when Ethan asked what she meant, Patricia smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and replied, "You think you can just live here forever? Well, you're wrong. The moment Maya turns 18, you're both out of this house." Robert nodded in agreement and added, "Patricia's right. We've done our legal duty by housing you temporarily. But once Maya becomes an adult, she can take responsibility for herself and her brother, and we can finally get our lives back to normal." Maya felt the blood drain from her face as she realized they had been planning to abandon her and Ethan all along, that the next 6 months were just a countdown to homelessness. And as she looked across the table at her brother's terrified expression, she thought about the mysterious envelope hidden upstairs and wondered if somehow, somewhere, someone had anticipated this moment and left them a way out of the nightmare their lives had become. Maya's 18th birthday arrived on a cold April morning with no cake, no presents, and no celebration. Just Patricia standing in the kitchen, holding 2 old suitcases and wearing a smile that looked more like a predator showing its teeth as she announced, "Happy birthday, Maya. Today is your Independence Day, and ours too. So you and Ethan have exactly 4 hours to pack everything you own and get out of our house forever." Robert emerged from his office, carrying a manila folder and a pen, explaining in his businesslike voice that Maya was now legally an adult and therefore responsible for her minor brother, that their guardianship obligations were officially over, and that he needed her to sign papers acknowledging she was taking custody of Ethan voluntarily so they couldn't be held responsible for anything that happened afterward. Maya's hands shook as she signed the documents, her mind racing as she tried to figure out where they could possibly go, because her job at the coffee shop barely paid enough for food and bus fare, let alone rent for an apartment, and she had never felt so terrified and helpless in her entire life. Ethan cried silently as they packed their few belongings, stuffing clothes and books into the cheap suitcases while Patricia hovered in the doorway making comments about how they were taking too long and needed to hurry up because she had important plans that afternoon. The moment they stepped outside with their suitcases, Robert closed the door behind them with a final click that sounded like a prison gate, and Maya stood on the sidewalk holding Ethan's hand while watching the only shelter they had known for 6 months disappear forever as a taxi drove them toward downtown and an uncertain future. Maya had called 3 homeless shelters that morning, and only St. Vincent's had space available. But when they arrived at the large brick building with bars on the windows, Maya's heart sank as she realized this would be their new reality, sharing cramped rooms with strangers, waiting in lines for meals, and trying to maintain some dignity while living among people who had given up hope entirely. The intake worker, a tired woman named Sandra, processed their paperwork with practiced efficiency, while explaining the rules about curfews and chores, and the requirement that Maya find full-time work within 2 weeks or risk losing their beds, and Maya nodded along, while Ethan sat beside her looking smaller and more defeated than she had ever seen him. Their room was barely larger than a closet, with 2 narrow beds separated by a thin curtain, and Maya lay awake that first night listening to Ethan's quiet sobs while trying to figure out how she could possibly support them both on her coffee shop wages, especially when she needed to find a real apartment before the shelter kicked them out for staying too long. Days blended into a nightmare of job applications and rejections, with Maya walking miles through the city looking for work, while Ethan struggled to focus on his schoolwork in the shelter's noisy common area, and both of them growing thinner, as Maya stretched their small food budget to last the entire week. The other shelter residents were kind, but broken, sharing stories of job losses and medical bankruptcies and family betrayals that made Maya realize how easily anyone could end up homeless. And she began to understand that she and Ethan were just one crisis away from becoming permanent fixtures in this world of desperation and forgotten dreams. 2 weeks after their 18th birthday exodus from the Blackwell house, Maya was sitting on her narrow bed counting the few dollars left in her wallet when she suddenly remembered the mysterious envelope hidden in her old room, the one from the lawyer James Morrison that she was supposed to open on her birthday, and she felt a surge of panic as she realized she had left it behind in her desperate rush to pack and leave. But then Ethan surprised her by pulling the cream-colored envelope from his backpack, explaining that he had grabbed it at the last minute because something told him it might be important. And Maya's hands trembled as she held the envelope that might contain answers to questions she didn't even know how to ask. The envelope felt heavier than she expected, and when she carefully tore it open, she found a letter written on expensive letterhead, along with a business card for Morrison and Associates, but the contents of the letter made her gasp out loud and grab Ethan's arm so tightly that he winced in pain. The letter was brief, but earth-shattering. Dear Maya and Ethan, if you are reading this letter, then David and Sarah Chen are no longer with you, and I extend my deepest condolences for your loss. But I must inform you that there are matters of great importance regarding your inheritance that we must discuss immediately, as significant assets have been held in trust awaiting your 18th birthday, and your current living situation may not reflect your true circumstances. Maya read the letter 3 times before the words began to make sense, because the idea that she and Ethan might have an inheritance seemed impossible when they had been living like unwanted charity cases. But the letter continued with even more shocking revelations. Your biological parents, Alina and Marcus Williams, died when you were very young, leaving behind considerable assets that have been managed in trust, and it is crucial that you contact my office immediately to discuss your rights and options, as there may be individuals who have not been acting in your best interests. Maya stared at Ethan in the dim light of their shelter room, both of them processing the impossible possibility that their entire lives had been built on lies, that somewhere out there they had biological parents they had never known about, and that the Blackwells might have known far more about their situation than they had ever revealed. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper as he asked Maya, "What if our whole life has been a lie?" And Maya looked at the lawyer's business card in her shaking hands, knowing that tomorrow she would have to make a phone call that might change everything they thought they knew about themselves, their past, and their future, while wondering if they were about to discover that their months of suffering and homelessness had been completely unnecessary, and that somewhere in the shadows, people had been making decisions about their lives without their knowledge or consent. Maya's hands trembled as she dialed the number on James Morrison's business card at exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, using the shelter's payphone, while Ethan stood beside her, with nervous energy crackling through his entire body. And when a gentle voice answered Morrison and Associates. "How may I help you?" Maya barely managed to whisper. "This is Maya Williams. I found a letter that says I should call you about an inheritance." The receptionist's voice immediately changed to one of excitement and relief as she said, "Maya, Mr. Morrison has been waiting for your call for years. Please hold on while I get him right away." And within seconds, an elderly man's warm voice came on the line saying, "My dear child, I cannot tell you how worried I have been about you and Ethan. Where are you right now, and are you both safe?" Maya felt tears streaming down her face as she explained about the homeless shelter and their terrible months with the Blackwells, and Mr. Morrison's sharp intake of breath told her that something was very wrong with their situation even before he said, "Maya, I need you and Ethan to come to my office immediately. There are things you must know that will change everything, and I promise you that your days of struggling are over." The law offices of Morrison and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor of a gleaming downtown building, and when Maya and Ethan stepped off the elevator in their worn clothes, carrying plastic bags with their few possessions, they felt completely out of place among the marble floors and expensive artwork until James Morrison himself appeared. a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes that filled with tears the moment he saw them. He led them into his private office and stared at them for a long moment before saying, "You look exactly like your mother Alina, Maya, and Ethan has his father Marcus's eyes. I can see them both in you so clearly," and the twins exchanged confused glances because they had never heard these names before and couldn't understand how this stranger knew what their biological parents looked like. Morrison walked to a wall safe behind his desk and pulled out a thick folder along with several photographs, and when he placed the pictures in front of them, Maya gasped because she was looking at two people who could have been older versions of herself and Ethan, a beautiful woman with Maya's dark hair and smile, and a tall man with Ethan's angular features and intelligent eyes. Your parents, Alina and Marcus Williams, were brilliant entrepreneurs who built Williams Tech Solutions from nothing into a company worth over $50 million, Morrison explained, his voice heavy with emotion. But they died in a plane crash when you were 3 and Ethan was 1, and they left everything to you in a trust fund that I have been managing for 17 years, waiting for this day when Maya turned 18 and could claim your inheritance. Maya felt the world spinning around her as Morrison continued, explaining that her biological parents had been young and successful, that they had loved their children desperately, and that they had made careful legal arrangements to ensure Maya and Ethan would be well cared for until they came of age, but somehow everything had gone terribly wrong. The most shocking revelation came when Morrison pulled out financial records showing that David and Sarah Chen had been paid a generous monthly allowance to care for the children, money that was supposed to cover not just basic needs but private schools, tutoring, college savings, and a comfortable lifestyle. But Morrison's face darkened as he explained that, after the Chun's death, all of that money had been redirected to the Blackwells as the named backup guardians. Robert Blackwell was your father's business partner and the secondary trustee, Morrison said, his voice growing angry. He received over $8,000 every month for your care, money that should have provided you with everything you needed and more, but from what you've told me, he spent almost nothing on your actual welfare and pocketed the rest for himself. Maya felt sick as she realized that while she and Ethan had been treated like unwanted burdens, living on scraps and wearing hand-me-down clothes, the Blackwells had been stealing thousands of dollars every month that belonged to them, money their biological parents had left specifically to ensure their children lived comfortable, happy lives. Morrison showed them bank statements, proving that the Williams Tech Company had continued to grow and prosper under professional management, that their trust fund now contained over $50 million in cash and investments, and that they owned several properties, including their parents' original house, which had been maintained and kept exactly as Alina and Marcus had left it. There's more, Morrison said quietly, opening another folder. David and Sarah Chen never knew about the inheritance. They thought they were simply helping a family friend by adopting 2 orphaned children, and they loved you so completely that they gave up their comfortable retirement savings to provide for you, never knowing that plenty of money was available for your care. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he realized that their beloved adoptive parents had sacrificed their own financial security out of pure love, while the people who were supposed to be managing their real inheritance had been stealing from them and treating them like garbage. Morrison continued revealing the devastating truth, explaining that the Blackwells had been filing false reports, claiming they were providing excellent care while actually spending the minimum possible amount, and keeping detailed records of every penny they grudgingly spent, as if Maya and Ethan should be grateful for basic food and shelter. The worst part, Morrison said, his voice shaking with rage, is that Robert Blackwell knew exactly when Maya would turn 18, and he had been planning for years to cut you off the moment his legal obligations ended, probably hoping you would disappear and never discover the truth about your inheritance. Maya stared at the bank statements showing millions of dollars that belonged to her and Ethan, money that could have prevented all their suffering, all their fear, all their desperate struggles, and she felt a cold fury building inside her as she realized that every hungry night, every humiliation, every moment of terror about their future had been completely unnecessary. Morrison leaned forward and took both their hands in his weathered ones, his eyes fierce with determination, as he said, "Maya, Ethan, you are not homeless orphans struggling to survive. You are among the wealthiest young people in this state. And tomorrow we begin the process of not only claiming what is rightfully yours, but making sure that Robert Blackwell faces justice for what he has done to you." Ethan looked up through his tears and asked the question that broke Maya's heart. "You mean David and Sarah gave up their comfortable life to raise us, never knowing we had millions? They loved us for nothing in return?" And Morrison nodded sadly, confirming that their adoptive parents had been the truest family they could have ever asked for. People who had chosen love over money and had given everything they had to two children who weren't even biologically theirs, while the people who were supposed to protect their inheritance had been the ones who betrayed them most cruelly of all. The next 3 months passed like a whirlwind of lawyers, courtrooms, and newspaper headlines as James Morrison worked tirelessly to expose the Blackwells' crimes and restore Maya and Ethan to their rightful inheritance. And the first victory came when FBI agents arrived at Robert Blackwell's office with handcuffs and a warrant for his arrest on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and child neglect that could send him to prison for 20 years. Patricia Blackwell's perfect social world crumbled overnight when news of their crimes hit the newspapers with headlines like, "Wealthy couple steals millions from orphaned children," and photos of Maya and Ethan looking thin and desperate from their shelter days, and Maya felt a cold satisfaction watching Patricia's face on television as reporters surrounded her outside the country club, asking her how she could sleep at night, knowing she had stolen food from children's mouths. The legal battles revealed even more shocking details about the Blackwells' deception, including falsified reports to the court claiming they had spent money on private schools and medical care that Maya and Ethan never received. And Morrison presented evidence showing that Robert had used their inheritance money to buy expensive cars, jewelry, and vacations while feeding the children cheap food and making them wear donated clothes. But as the weeks passed, Maya discovered that revenge felt hollow and empty, and instead of focusing on the Blackwells' punishment, she found herself thinking more and more about David and Sarah Chen and how they would want her and Ethan to use their unexpected wealth, not for hatred, but for healing and helping others who had suffered similar betrayals. The first step toward healing came when Morrison took them to see their biological parents' house, a beautiful Victorian home that had been preserved exactly as Alina and Marcus Williams had left it 17 years ago, with family photos still on the mantelpiece and children's toys still in the bedrooms, that had been waiting all these years for Maya and Ethan to come home. Standing in their parents' bedroom, looking at pictures of Alina holding a baby Maya and Marcus teaching toddler Ethan to walk, Maya felt a strange sense of completion, as if she was finally understanding where she came from and why she had always felt like something was missing in her life, even during the happiest times with the Chens. But the most emotional moment came when they visited David and Sarah Chen's grave for the first time since the funeral. And Maya knelt beside the headstone with fresh flowers and whispered, "Mom, Dad, we know the truth now about how much you sacrificed for us, how you gave up everything just because you loved us, and we promise to honor your memory by loving others the way you loved us." Ethan placed his hand on the gravestone and added through his tears, "Thank you for choosing us when you didn't have to. Thank you for showing us what real family means. And thank you for teaching us that love isn't about blood or money. It's about choice, and we choose to remember you forever." With Morrison's help, Maya and Ethan established the Alina and Marcus Williams Foundation, dedicating $10 million to helping children aging out of foster care with scholarships, housing assistance, and job training programs. And they also created the David and Sarah Chen Memorial Fund to support families who adopt or foster children. ensuring that loving parents like the Chens would never have to worry about providing for the children they choose to love. Maya enrolled in business school to learn how to properly manage their family company, Williams Tech Solutions, while Ethan decided to study social work so he could personally help children who had experienced trauma and loss, and they bought a modest but comfortable house near their old neighborhood, close enough to visit the Chun's grave every week, and far enough from the Blackwell mansion to feel safe and free. The most surprising discovery came 6 months later, when Morrison introduced them to other families that David and Sarah Chen had quietly helped over the years. Elderly neighbors whose medical bills the Chens had paid, single mothers whose children the Chens had tutored for free, and homeless veterans whom the Chens had helped find jobs and housing. All done with their own limited retirement money, because they believed in using whatever resources they had to make the world a little bit better. Maya realized that she had inherited far more than money from her biological parents, and far more than love from her adoptive parents. She had inherited a responsibility to use her wealth wisely, and a heart that understood the difference between having money and being rich, between being powerful and being kind, between getting justice and creating healing. Robert Blackwell was eventually sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to pay back every stolen penny with interest, while Patricia lost their house, their cars, and their social status, becoming the kind of person she had once looked down upon. But Maya felt no joy in their downfall, because she had learned that true victory wasn't about watching enemies fall, but about lifting up the people who needed help. On the first anniversary of David and Sarah's death, Maya and Ethan stood together at the cemetery with dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the Chen's quiet generosity. And as Maya looked around at all the faces of people who remembered her adoptive parents with love and gratitude, she realized that the greatest inheritance wasn't the $50 million from Alina and Marcus Williams, but the example of unconditional love that David and Sarah Chen had shown them every day of their childhood. As they walked away from the cemetery hand in hand, Maya and Ethan carried with them the knowledge that they had been blessed with two sets of parents who had loved them completely, one pair who had given them life and resources, and another pair who had given them love and values, and they were determined to spend the rest of their lives proving worthy of both legacies by using their wealth, not for luxury or revenge, but for the same kind of quiet, generous love that had shaped them into the people they had become.